Hey Ellen, how are you?
I'm doing well. You're catching me on a day where I've had 2 workouts today, so my brain may not be fully here, but I'm really, really excited to jump into this conversation with you.
No, it's perfect. It's perfect. You and I actually know each other from a past role that I had working with you as a practitioner, and then you guided me through the best breathwork session of my life. It was transformative,
Mm.
but you do so much more than that. Your work is really comprehensive. So if if I'm an old friend of yours from school or something and we bump into each other at a cafe and I'm like, Ellen, what are you up to these days? How would you describe tripwithellen.com? How would you describe the work you do?
I so appreciate this question because I feel like I'm in this moment of also transforming, as I think many of us are. And the best way to, I think, just even sum up or kind of funnel down and hone in on what I feel like all of my work is about is really embodying aliveness, living the fullest life that you possibly can. And that's the best way I think I could describe it. And what I mean by living your fullest life is, I think, being able to kind of gather all of that creative life force and fuel it towards something that just fills you up, really. I want to use the word fun. I want to use the word inspired. I want to, all those words. And it doesn't necessarily have to be your career or your job. And I think that's kind of the tricky place that a lot of people find themselves like, well, what is my purpose? And, what does being alive actually mean? It has nothing necessarily to do with the work that you do, or the way in which you make an income. And I think that's the journey and sort of the lessons I've been receiving myself in even being a healing facilitator, but really learning how to embody that fullest creative expression of your life, being able to authentically express everything that you're feeling, your joy, your highest joys, most expansive joys, as well as your deepest and, kind of sometimes darkest feelings, your anger, your grief, your rage, your frustrations. And I think we're living in a time right now where, that let's just call it a darker side or a more difficult, challenging, uncomfortable, side of the emotional spectrum is really almost kind of becoming, for some of us, like the baseline, because we're seeing how the world is changing and everything feels like it's in collapse right now. But I think where my work has really kind of transformed or evolved since the last time we spoke is diving really consciously into death work. Being able to really name it as death work, allowing those natural cycles of, you know, old beliefs, old patterns, parts of ourselves, being able to let those parts die so that something different, something truer can emerge out of it. So yeah, I don't know if that answered your question, but
No, it totally did. And that's something I'm excited to dig into in a moment. Um, I know that you're in this sort of spiritual healing space, helping people transform. Um, but you weren't always doing this. And
Mhm.
I think in the past, you were kind of in like creative leadership.
Mhm.
I'm curious what sparked that change for you to then say, this is my vision and this is what I'm going to do with my life.
Yeah. I think in one word or 2 words, I guess, it would be burnout. I was really feeling the burnout of my career as an executive creative director being in digital marketing. And I got into it, I went to art school, I learned graphic design, I learned advertising. I love design. I love being in Photoshop. I love tinkering, and noodling away. I love video editing, like all that kind of stuff. I love it. I love it all. But I was realizing at that moment, this was like 2017, just feeling this sense of constant imposter syndrome that literally would not go away, and a constant sense of anxiety. I was starting to notice that as I drove to work every morning, I would have shortness of breath. And this is something that I never really experience, at least consciously experience, my entire life until that moment. And so all of this was sort of coming to a head and just feeling very inadequate, feeling like I am not in the right place for me for some reason, and like things aren't fitting. And it was this constant feeling of almost kind of like my gears, like, or my engine redlining, like there's like the gears weren't like really clicking in. And, I was exerting a lot of effort every single day and almost feeling like I was bleeding out my life force. I was looking at the work I was doing, and I had some big name clients like Lego and, Viacom, BET, all Oprah, and none of it was bringing any real sense of joy or fulfillment to me. And so I started to look at my career like, I don't know if this is quite what's right for me. It doesn't feel like I'm actually making much of a difference. It doesn't feel like I'm using my energy in a way that is generative. It feels very capitalistic, yeah, I just felt like there was a wrongness in my body. That's probably the best way I could describe it.
That's all speaking to me. I think there's a lot of people who listen to this who would are silently raising their hands. Um, that must have been so scary, though. Was it a challenging thing to move outside of that and go forward? Did you feel super free, like, once you committed to it? I'm curious what that transition was like for you.
It was hard AF, and I did not feel necessarily like I felt a sense of relief when I made the decision to leave that career. But then it's like my body only knew how to be a workhorse. It only knew how to hustle and grind, you know? And so the next really like 7 years have been about me reprogramming my body to actually come back to a state, a rest, natural resting state of calm and allowance. But that didn't come straight away. It was definitely, I forget the term that people use. As soon as like my very, very last day of that career, it happened in April. The very next day, I was sitting in a lawyer's office with a colleague of mine who had also left that career behind, same company. She and I had talked about creating a company together, and we had no idea what we were going to make. But yet we were there sitting in the lawyer's office signing partnership papers. And I think the reason why it happened so fast like that was because there was almost kind of this sense of like desperation to know or have a path in front of me that I can really like lock onto. And okay, I have a partner, we're going to build a business, have no idea what the hell it is going to be, but we're doing this, and signing a contract was almost kind of like a trauma response to that feeling of like, I got to know what my path is. I have to know exactly where I am. And almost like it gave me this false sense of assurance that now I'm on this different path and I'm going this way. But yeah, the next year, especially the first 2 years, I feel like out of that career was probably some of the hardest lessons of my life. Yeah, it was not easy, but it was
That's
also, it was like learning how to be a partner with somebody who is drastically different than you. The whole process of you and building a business that became almost kind of like the portal for me to heal, which I did not know at the time. I thought, okay, we're just building this business. And sure enough, it's like all the wisdom or the insights, the healing that I need to do came through building this business and through this partnership. And so it was a lot of nights of just, kind of silently freaking out and feeling like I was failing always. And, you know, that imposter syndrome didn't go away because that's had nothing really to do with my career. It had everything to do with my own relationship to myself. And so it didn't matter where I was really, the career, this new job, or this new business I was building. It was the same story, different, dressing. So, but now I actually had space, I would say. I wasn't committed to a 9 to 5. I was working a lot more because I was trying to breathe life into this new thing, but I could explore a little bit more. And we ended up creating a podcast that allowed us to explore energy healing and alternative healing methods and modalities. And all of that was really my education that kind of guided me into this path of becoming a breathwork facilitator, a medicine facilitator, and, death worker.
That's beautiful, and also so brave, because I think there's a lot of people who feel burnt out, who feel disconnected from, like, they have that anxiety and shortness of breath going into work. I know that most of the time when I wake up, I'm not looking forward to going into work, but it's something that we're sort of trained from even school that we have to do. You have to get your work done. You have to do that. And so I think a lot of people probably wait until they have something else lined up to step into it, but lose so much time and so much potential. So I just think it's so brave that you acted on just that internal, that you listened and then acted on that internal nudge.
Thank you. At the time, it didn't feel brave. I'll be totally honest. It felt almost kind of like I have to do this. Otherwise, there's no other choice. You know what I mean? It almost felt like some invisible hand was pushing me off the ledge, and I just had to jump. Otherwise, the alternative of staying where I was so, just it felt excruciating. It felt like this cannot happen, you know? And so it was almost like I had to put blinders on and just keep on walking one foot after another and just step by step by step, and trudging through. And as somebody who tends towards avoidance and escaping, feeling pain, feeling discomfort, that was really, I think, my kind of like my healing, my boot camp, my initiation, dark night of the soul, like all the words, all the things that you've ever heard it mentioned, like named. That was that moment. And really, looking back on it, yes, I can see it as bravery, but also in the moment, it feels kind of like almost like just survival. Like it's not just like your physical body survival. It's like some part of your soul is needing to survive by it. Like it couldn't live the lie anymore. It had to like wake up. It had to do this thing.
Yeah. So it was a death of that part of your life and then a bit of a rebirth. On your site, I was actually reading you, I think there was a philosophy or something that said where death initiates life.
Mm,
Um,
mhm.
what does that mean to you? Could you expand?
Yeah. So this is something that, as of 2023, I went through death doula training that year with Going with Grace, Alua Arthur. Um, for anybody who's listening, amazing program. I highly recommend their retreats. It was life changing. And I didn't do it because I wanted to become a death doula necessarily, but it was again one of those nudges where I'm like, there's something in this that I feel like I have to explore. I don't want to. Like, it's not this like, yay, I can't wait to do this. But again, it was almost like this invisible hand going, go there, So I just sort of like turned my brain off, and all the things saying like, this is scary. This is like, what are you doing? And I just went for it. And again, yeah, life changing experience. I think anybody, any human being should take this course or do this training. Um, the next few years, I was really, I guess the next year, 2023 and 2024, I really dove into exploring death and grief. And this all comes from, my dad passing away when I was 15. He died of what I learned recently was H1N1. So, some early form of COVID, essentially. And this was back in 1992. So my entire life, my entire journey, even becoming a workaholic in my career and, all of this entire journey has really been about me escaping that grief. And so I think that's why, again, I needed to do this death doula training. There was something in it for me to continue in this growth and evolution to understand, or at least just even experience walking so closely with death, studying death, being okay, being around like physical death. Um, and so, in these 2 years of just walking very closely with death and holding grief circles, using breath work specifically for grief expression, and really kind of befriending grief in that entire period and learning, like kind of re-examining why, societally we have such a fear and aversion towards grief and feeling grief. Like it's something that's talked about as, you get over, right? Like you grieve for a little bit and then you get over. But my understanding of it is it's always here. It's ever present, because grief is present when things change. When you are going from one reality into the next, and you're in that liminal space of change between this one reality, whether it's, you know, somebody you love being alive in their human form to suddenly them not being here anymore, or you being, somebody who has no dependence one day, and then suddenly you become a mother or a father or a parent. There's these changes that happen, and within every single change there's always grief. And so in this deep dive, I really started to appreciate what grief allows us to do, which is really feel deeply, feel that love coursing through us, feel that love pouring out from our hearts into those that we love, into ourselves, into this world, into this earth. And I think in shifting my relationship with grief and walking with death so closely, that I started to recognize the value of death as not separate from life, but a intrinsic or inextricable part of life. As something is dying, something is always being born. It is literally the mechanism. It was during a medicine not retreat, but a journey that I did on my own with the sacred mushroom, where they were just showing me like a jellyfish actually like expanding and closing up. And then they directed me to my breath, this expansion of my lungs as I breathe in, and this closing of my lungs as I breathe out, right? And this mechanism of expansion and contraction, of birth and death, really. And I remember being in that journey, and so like it's almost like like my mind was blown that this universal mechanism that propels everything in this universe literally is hidden in this act of breathing that we do consciously and unconsciously every single day. Like when you stop breathing, you die and you leave this form. And so I think what I realized in, again, walking with grief, walking really closely with death, studying death, being in these medicine spaces with people as they are literally dying, parts of them are dying, and new, raw parts are emerging. I realized like you have to die. You have to die for you to actually really live. Like you cannot spend your entire life in the same place, in the same situation, not dying, holding on like so hard to your loved ones, your situation, your home, whatever it is that you have such an attachment to. You if you do, you're not really living. You're not fully being able to express that life force to your fullest extent, So I think there's a saying that I read in the book, The Immortality Key, that's I think written above someplace in Greece, to you die before you die so that you don't die when you die. I think that was the full inscription. But yeah, it was just this like realization, like death is actually a part of life. It starts life. If you even look at nature and the way the mushrooms, and fungi kind of break down things and compost the earth, compost things that have died and turn them back into soil to become food for the living, death always is a part of that cycle. It's not separate from life. It is life.
Yeah. I see it a lot too in seasons, leaves, spring and then fall, everything dies and comes back again. It's just a circle. It has this work. Before it, were you scared of death? It sounds like maybe you struggled with processing your dad's passing and maybe turned towards work. Has this work changed your view? Are you no longer afraid of death if you ever were before? Or what message would you say to people who are scared of change, scared of death, and really feel comfortable with status quo their whole life?
Yeah. This is such a good question. My relationship with death, I think like many people, especially many people in the West, we grow up in a society that fears death. We fear aging. We're constantly chasing youth, right? And especially if you identify as being a woman or female, like there's added pressure to staying young and a maiden versus walking towards your crone years. And I'm 49 right now. So, I'm on that cusp of like, kind of, going through a threshold of becoming, I'm in middle age right now and going towards, this like older or becoming the older generation. So you feel that pressure a lot. And I think it's programmed into us from almost birth, to fear some sort of change. I think we're biologically even designed to fear change and want to seek the familiar. Which is why sometimes our nervous systems kind of go haywire when something unknown is staring us in the face, or we're being pushed to go into something that we haven't experienced before. I still get nervous before every single medicine journey I do, no matter how many I've done, because it's always something different. There's always some unknown factor. So I see death the same way. I actually have a belief, and I feel like I've heard this perhaps in Buddhist traditions or elsewhere, but after doing this death doula training, I started to realize that every single fear that we encounter in life is actually a fear of death in some sort of wrapper, whether it's fear of bugs, fear of heights, fear of being seen. I really feel like fear of being seen is ultimately a fear of rejection. And back in the day when we were all tribal, I feel like when you were rejected by your tribe, that ensured your death essentially. You needed your tribe to be able to survive. So we've evolved as humans, and every single fear that we have now, I really do think it kind of ladders back down to ultimately this fear of death. So yeah, I absolutely am afraid in some ways of death because I have fear. Um, but I've been doing this Buddhist practice. It's basically the 9 different contemplations of death, and they take you through these 9 truths about death, and you really sit and meditate and reflect on these truths. And I have found that this practice, I facilitate it twice a year for free, just because I believe in the practice so much. But it really helps you to stop and really consider the fact that you have no idea what's going to happen in the next hour, let alone tomorrow or the next day. None of us can know the day that we're going to be leaving this body or this earth. And so it really requires us to stay as present as we possibly can. And I think that's where I find my work kind of centered around, like, how do we stay as present? And that's just another way of saying, like, how do we stay truly like alive, like really, really live? Um, so yeah, I think this work has really been about me kind of facing those edges and really kind of wanting to peer in and get comfortable talking about it. And there's also just this, I think, an innate curiosity in me, because none of us have gone to the other side and come back. Even those that have had near death experiences, you could say they've kind of semi crossed over, but really, nobody's ever actually has like, they've never gone and stayed and actually come back. And so it's a big question mark what's going to happen. But it's my belief that, a physical death is just another transition, just like all the transitions that we have in life. It's another transition. Your body knows exactly what to do, but we fear it because we haven't ever experienced or seen the other side. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's so new. And the breath work that you took me through a couple years ago, um, was so profound just for being in the moment and um, exploring feelings and thoughts that I hadn't really, that I'd ignored, I
Mm-hmm.
would say. It sounds like you use breath work, sacred medicine, other things to help people in the work you do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, some people have heard of breath work, but don't know what it is. How would you describe it, and why is that such a powerful gateway? Why is that a modality that you lean on?
So, the kind of breath work that I facilitate is called conscious connected breath work. And there's many different types. All of them basically originate from pranayama. And I think that's important to name that too, because, I think there's a lot of things that are being created right now that feel divorced from the roots. And I think it's always really important to also, um, study the roots, study the origins and where it all comes from. So this conscious connected breath work, the intention is really to move energy through your body and to move that energy that may be stuck. I have studied a form of somatic therapy work called somagetics, and it's really it's the study of the energetics of trauma. And so with breath work, as you're breathing through your mouth and moving that energy through your body, what you're doing is you may be unlocking or kind of bringing up energy that may be suppressed or repressed in the fascia or the tissue of your body. You're bringing it up to the surface, which is why this practice could sometimes be really, really powerful. And I want to say sometimes because every single journey that you take, a breathwork journey, it's usually pretty different. Sometimes you may experience some emotional release. Sometimes you may travel. It may be very psychedelic and you travel to these different dimensions and have these wild experiences. Sometimes nothing happens. Sometimes you fall asleep. And I always like to describe it as, whatever you receive in that moment is what you need most. And sometimes that is literally to get completely knocked out because you are so tired. And the kind of sleep you get during a breathwork journey is so deep. It's kind of different than sleeping at night. So sometimes that's exactly the medicine that you need. Uh, so I'm trying to remember what your question was.
Oh, just basically like, what is breathwork? Why is it such a powerful gateway? Um, and then as you were talking about somatics, I'm kind of curious how that ties in. It sounds like some of the trauma might be stored physically. And is that what somatic work does? Does it help release that once it comes up?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
I think there's different ways to approach trauma, but I'm a believer that trauma lives in the body. It's almost like an energetic suppression, or sometimes people call it even energetic cysts, like a pocket of energy from that moment of an event where it wasn't able to be fully metabolized or processed. It gets lodged inside of our tissue. And usually it's in these big areas of our body, whether it's the belly, the back, the shoulder, our chest. Like there's a lot of different areas that our trauma likes to kind of get embedded into. And so with breath work, as you're moving the energy through, these things kind of surface. For me, what I connected breath work to being really useful for is actually grief work. And when you're talking about traditional Chinese medicine and all the different areas, like the different organs that certain energies or emotions are stored in or processed through, grief is always connected to the lungs. And so typically when you are deep in active grief, it's almost kind of like you can't get enough air into your lungs. Your lungs are collapsed. Your energy is like going straight down. And it's depressed when you are deep in active grief. And so by doing breath work, you're again moving that energy through your body. You're opening up your lungs. You're very consciously breathing that energy through and getting that breath moving. And so it allows you to be able to express what may be suppressed or repressed from years ago. And I feel like a lot of the suppression and repression that we have is pain, right? It's pain that we haven't been able to fully process or feel. And so and oftentimes it's grief, it's unresolved grief that we haven't been allowed ourselves to fully confront or admit is there, or, we've run away from, escaped, avoided, you know, did everything in your power to not feel. So I find that with breath work, some of the most powerful sessions I've had with people are them processing grief from years ago, sometimes even lifetimes ago, I feel like, even grief that's not theirs, that perhaps their parent, their mother, or their father kind of gave to them. So it's a lot of grief processing that happens in breath work.
I'm actually going to touch on that in a little bit because I think there is a part of your site that talks about ancestral healing.
Mm,
Um, I could be wrong, but I believe I came across that.
yeah.
But I'm curious, you keep mentioning like spirit medicine work, sacred medicine. Um, what is sacred medicine and how do they help with deep healing in ways that sort of normal talk therapy might not?
Mm. So, sacred medicine, spirit medicine, I like to call it, it's essentially psychedelic medicine or entheogenic medicine, earth medicine. I particularly work with the sacred mushroom, psilocybin, and I also work with cannabis as a sacred earth medicine or a spirit medicine. And so I'm a big believer that these medicines um, they are very much alive and very sentient, and they work on that spirit body level, not just the physical body level. And your spirit body, your emotional body, your physical body, they're all connected, right? And so oftentimes we have physical ailments or physical dis-ease when something's happening in our emotional body or spirit body, and we try to treat it, I think, in the West from a physical place, but sometimes you actually need to go into those other areas, the emotional body, the spiritual body. And every case is always different, but I find that the people who come to me wanting to do a journey with the sacred mushroom or do a cannabis. And I created a practice called Cannabis, where you imbibe cannabis in a ceremonial way, and then you lay down and you go through a breathwork journey. And I find that the combination actually takes you quite deep. So in both of these cases, in all the spirit medicines, any psychedelic medicine journey you could go on or experience, you're really working with your subconscious. You're in a different state, an altered state. Your perception shifts. And I find that these medicines sometimes they act as amplifiers to kind of amplify the energy within you and outside of you, which is why set and setting are incredibly important in these when you're working with these kinds of medicines. You want to be in a safe environment. You want to feel like you can let go and drop in really deeply. And in my experience, you know, just like breath work, every single spirit medicine journey is different for every single person. And so somebody who may be going through, active grief or something really, acute, or they may be feeling a lot of rage, we always set an intention for what it is that is drawing them to want to do this journey. And I like to work with people where we go through a few weeks of preparation. Sometimes that preparation actually does involve breath work, doing a journey to sort of start to open up the body. I always involve altar work into the preparation protocol. And altar work to me is I invite them to create a small altar if they don't have one already and bring in representation of spirits, ancestors, well ancestors, or spirit of the ocean, or animal spirits, energies that they want to work with, that they want to bring in. Oftentimes, people will come to me because they either feel like they're stuck, they don't find joy in anything anymore, and so the intention becomes, how do I feel joy again? I want to feel that energy, that frequency of joy, and so part of that altar becomes items, spirits that bring joy into them. I have them listen to music that feels joyful to them and practice bringing in that frequency into their bodies on on repeat. It becomes a practice, a conscious practice. And everybody's protocol looks a little bit different depending on what their intention is. But when you go into these spaces, again, they amplify the energy, right? So whatever you've been practicing bringing in, that gets amplified. And it's wild because you can't ever predict how the medicine is going to show you what you need to see or what you need to feel or what you need to face. I've had people who have literally, their words, not mine, visited the land of the dead, and they've visited, literally the dead, people that they have known that have passed on to receive messages. I've had people who've had full conversations with parents or family members that have already died, because I feel like in these spaces the veil is really thin, and because you're working with spirit, it's a spirit medicine, the veil gets kind of lifted or very porous. So you start to perceive the world in a very different way. I think the dampening that sometimes our brains have to allow us to be here more easily, that gets lifted. And so you're in this space now where you can receive a lot of information. And that's not everybody's journey, but a big portion of the journeys that I facilitate have this kind of a very mystical quality to them, which is really fascinating for me to be able to witness as I'm taking notes and and holding space for them.
And I would think so transformative too, to have an experience like that where you connect with someone who, is in your family that has passed, or to get a message that I think there would be something about that that would hit different, and really you would take it much more deeply than if
Mhm.
you were the one saying, "Hey, I see this in you." Um,
Totally. It's an
so we,
experience, right? It's
yeah,
experience. That's a weird way of saying it, but it's an embodied experience. It's like the difference between reading a book versus actually like reading a book about, you know, I don't know, Antarctica, and actually going to Antarctica and experiencing it fully in your body.
it's a perfect analogy. And I'll admit, I've never taken psilocybin. I've always been very curious. I've had coworkers that microdose it. I've heard a lot about ayahuasca being used in kind of a similar fashion, lifting a veil in a similar fashion. DMT.
Mm.
I don't know a lot about these. Do you have any takes or thoughts on them? And why maybe you don't use some of those versus sticking with psilocybin and cannabis?
I really think that the medicine, again, I see them as sentient beings, and I feel like they actually called me into service. It's not like I went searching for them, um, but it developed as this sort of curiosity in me first. And then as soon as I sat with them in my first journey, not with a facilitator or anything, just on my own with my partner, um, it's like something clicked in place. Had already become a breathwork facilitator at that point, and after this first journey, they opened me up in such a way where they kind of showed me, this is why you became a breathwork facilitator, so that you can actually be a steward for us. And so I feel like my education came directly from the medicine itself. There was a point in time where I was really feeling the call of ayahuasca. And then after I started working with the sacred mushroom, that call just started to kind of die down. I didn't feel the urge, the nudge, any sort of feeling that I needed to sit with ayahuasca, the grandmother. So I just kind of let her go and realized, okay, maybe my work is with the sacred children. But a few years ago, I had this really interesting dream one night that in my dream, I knew I was sitting with Bufo, 5-MeO-DMT. And in the dream, I was taken to this white space, um, like edgeless room, very matrix like, like completely
I
white
was thinking,
space.
yeah.
Yeah. And then I remember in the dream, I came back down and I was in a group setting and I was telling people what I experienced. And there was a lot of joy in it. And I remember waking up and I had this dream. It was like November of 2023. I had this dream. There had been a number of years back where, again, this feeling of like, there's something interesting about toad medicine, Bufo, that is calling to me. But I didn't feel it was time yet, you know? And in that time, I was really getting to know the sacred mushroom and developing a relationship with them, developing a relationship with cannabis. And so this dream came, and I knew it was a sign that, okay, they're calling me into service. They're calling me to experience them. I never sat with this medicine before. And that same week, 2 days later, I think I was on Instagram or somewhere, and this this woman who has a podcast on psychedelics as well, modern psychedelics, was talking about her experience recently at a retreat up in Vancouver. It was in Bowen Island off of Vancouver, and it was called Infold Institute. And she was talking about her experience there, and it was almost kind of like this moment of realizing, okay, the dream, seeing this, I'm clearly being asked to go. And so had the most profound experience there. But this is my long way of saying, I think certain people are called to certain medicines and certain people aren't called to certain medicines. And you just have to kind of listen, you know? I also am not a fan of the kind of psychedelic tourism that's been happening. And I feel like it's a bit extractive. So for me, I've been very conscious about listening to what medicines are actually calling me versus wanting to try them all, so to speak, you know. And no shade if that's how you like to roll, you know, but I feel like for me it doesn't feel quite right to, you know, explore every single medicine out there.
Is there anybody where using any sort of sacred medicine is not ideal? Or what do you say to clients who are really scared of losing control?
Mm. I mean, that second question, you know, I almost want to say that's why you should do a medicine journey because so many of us are so fearful of losing control. That's exactly the reason why, you know, you ought to do a medicine journey. I mean, losing control is dying, right? I
Yeah.
think that's where the fear is, you know, how do I can't lose control. I can't lose my grip on reality or, you know, what I know of reality. And the medicine really invites you to do that, you know, to let go and to see something different, something that may actually scare you, or something that just may open you up in such a beautiful way that, you know, it it's not for the faint of heart, I will say, and it's not for everyone. You know, I think there's a lot of people, especially in the most recent psychedelic renaissance, where it became such a buzzy thing where everybody's now going to an ayahuasca retreat to go sit with ayahuasca is not for everybody. So I feel like if you are somebody who's been diagnosed with something pretty, you know, like a diagnosis that I would say like bipolar, you know, anything that may be a little bit more serious where you're taking medication for it, you know, I do think that with depression, it may be something that you may want to explore and check out. But I would really do research, you know, and every medicine is different. You know, MDMA is going to be different than psilocybin, which is going to be different than ayahuasca, which is going to be different than an NDMT, 5-MeO-DMT. So every single medicine has their, you know, kind of their do's and don'ts and their watch outs. So if you are interested in it and, you know, you've been, you know, suffering from something that it feels incurable almost with pharmaceuticals, start to research. You know, that's the best way to even get started because I don't know if I would be able to actually like say definitively this person should or this person should not, and really talk to professionals. You know, talk to your therapist, talk to people who are facilitators of that medicine to determine if that's a right fit for you. But yes, absolutely, this medicine is not for everyone. I cannot stress that enough.
I'm noticing that ritual and it seems like nature are central to a lot of the work you do. Know there's some retreats you do. I believe you go into the mountains. I could be wrong on that, but that's what I remember from years ago. Um, why are they so essential to transformation?
Nature specifically, being in nature, to me, I feel like it's because we are part of it. And somehow this like modern life, modernity, being in cities, urban environments have kind of severed that relationship that we have with nature. I think we we speak the language of nature. We speak the language of trees and plants and animals, but I think a lot of us have forgotten how to receive those messages, which essentially is our connection to our intuition, our connection to this, our essence. And so I think being with nature, especially when you're doing, you're sitting with entheogenic medicine, I'll just speak to the sacred mushroom. For me, it's like you start to remember this beautiful, larger tapestry of life that you are a part of. And you start to see the aliveness in everything that perhaps you weren't conscious to, everything that you thought was inanimate. And I think there's something that is just so powerful about recognizing that, when you're in a forest and there's trees all around you, every single one of them are different individuals, just like you and I are different people. Starting to recognize that there's a wisdom in the trees, there's a wisdom in the wind, there's a wisdom, and all of them talk, all of them speak, all of them have messages, all of them share information. And I think we have relied so heavily on our intellect, particularly in modern society and urban environments, that we've kind of severed our connection to, again, our intuition and our essential spirit. And being with nature reminds us of that. And that's really part of the healing, that's part of coming home to who we really are. I don't think we are necessarily meant to go through life brain first, or intellect first. We're actually meant to walk through life heart first and feeling first. And yet, so many of us have also disconnected from our bodies or have these really kind of toxic relationships with our bodies. In my 5-MeO DMT journey, in that retreat, I experienced 2 journeys because they only last 20 minutes. So I chose to do 2 instead of 3 or 4 because I felt like after the second one, I felt like, okay, I'm done. I feel like I've gotten what I need. But that first journey up, I remember just completely just breaking down, crying out of just gratitude, like gratitude for this body, gratitude that I get to be here and experience life in this body and feel things and smell things and taste things and hug people and hug my fur babies, like it was just this. I i almost can't even express in words this recognition of what a gift this life is and this body is, and I needed to feel that. I really needed to feel that. And I think that is also a a lesson, you call it a lesson or wisdom that nature gives us too. Just this, I don't know, this recognition of just like what an incredible gift it is to be able to be with the trees, be with the mountains, be with all of these beings that all have such wisdom to offer. Because we don't all get to experience this, and our time here is so short, and we're so consumed with, what somebody said about us, or, this crazy Instagram feed, or what our government's doing. And it's not that those things aren't important, but I think we sometimes get so distracted by that we forget what life actually is about, just creating generative art and music and yeah, expressing life.
You forget where you come from and what's important. And I'm thinking about people who feel disconnected, people who have trauma that they suppress. And you had mentioned earlier that some of that trauma may be ancestral, may have
Hmm.
happened generations before you. How can you maybe just talk a little bit about ancestral healing? Like, how
Yeah.
does it help? And then what does somebody do if maybe they are not no longer connected to their parents or a certain line of their family tree. Is Are they able to still heal?
Yeah, this is I mean, thank you so much for this question. I I really have started to see all healing as ancestral healing, because that's really what we're here doing, like you and I, we're here on this earth in these bodies, in these families and these lineages, having inherited a lot of both the strengths and also the wounds that have come from, you know, the generations before us. So if you think about it, all healing that we do here is ancestral healing. All intentional healing has a ripple effect backwards in time, forwards in time. And you're here breaking patterns, breaking cycles, um, you know, breaking old ways of being, old ways of seeing life, old ways of showing up. And when I say old, I mean outdated, and a lot of these outdated models or behaviors or patterns or beliefs were things that we learned from our parents or grandparents. And, so all of that is ancestral. And, if you think about it, like your parents learned it from somewhere, so it keeps on going back. Even if you don't know your grandparents or have never met them, even if you have no idea who your great grandparents came from, even if you're adopted and you have zero idea or clue what your biological family looks like or where they're from, you know, you have them in you. They're in your blood, they're in your body. All you have to do is actually look inside and hear yourself and pay attention to your body, pay attention to what challenges you're facing, where your fears reside, and it maps out a whole story, a whole landscape of what happened to your ancestral lines, in both cases. You may not know the exact story, like this person did this and this is what happened. It's not going to play out like a movie, but it all lives inside all of us. So I've stopped looking at healing as separate, everything that we do is ancestral healing. Even living, breathing every single day, going to work, doing your thing, taking care of your kids, that's ancestral healing too. I think we fail to recognize that just living life is providing the opportunities for us to break patterns, to make different choices, to choose differently, show up differently every single moment, every single day. We're just not necessarily sitting in a ceremonial circle and like, singing or chanting or, breathing together. But, that's still healing, right? We're all healing. We're just choosing to do it differently and, consciously or unconsciously. Um, so I would say for those, I get this question a lot. I don't know my family. In fact, in my last retreat, there was a woman who was adopted, and she had gotten one single photo of her maternal, her mother and her maternal grandmother. And during the medicine, it was a medicine retreat, all for Asian women and femmes. But during the medicine retreat, medicine journey, she actually connected to both her maternal and her paternal side. And she had never met anybody, and never knew any of them. And again, it's not like she knows the backstory, but she could sense their energy and she could sense, kind of who they are, their essence. And it was really powerful just to hear her experience of it all. Um, so it doesn't matter if you don't know the stories. I don't have really any concept of who my, mother's mother, her side of the family were in Hong Kong. No idea. I want to know the stories, but I think they're kind of gone or lost. But I feel them, I feel that whatever I'm experiencing in my life harkens back to them, and I think having walked consciously with my ancestors now for about, the last 5 years, I feel like I have gotten to know them, not even individually. I feel like I've gotten to know my paternal grandmother better in death than I had ever known her in life through altar work. But I've also gotten to know my dad better in death than even in life through the same thing, through this conscious altar work. And I've gotten to know that my ancestors like flank me and they are here cheering me on with everything that I I choose to face all the things that feel like really uncomfortable and really difficult. Um, and I again, turn my brain off and I just keep on walking forward. And I feel the pride. I feel them sort of surrounding me. Um, and so you can absolutely develop relationships if you're open to it, even if they're not here anymore, and I that's something I like to stress in my work too. They're still here. They're just not necessarily embodied, but their energy is still very, very much here.
Yeah, energy doesn't change. It
Mm.
doesn't delete. I would imagine somebody working with you experiences this in, profound insights, awakening, whatever you want to label it as. Sometimes certain modalities, I'll just say like a massage, they feel great, and then a couple days later, the knots come back.
Yeah.
When working with people or doing a retreat, how do people? Does a shift stick, or what do you sort of suggest for people for this sort of awakening, for them to stay on that path after the initial magic moment fades?
This is like, I think the the best question that I feel like every single facilitator needs to answer, because it really shows how they view their work and how they view healing in general. And I think when I first started, on this healing path myself, I was kind of on that trajectory of feeling like, okay, if I take these steps, then there will be a day where I will be healed and everything's all good and I'll be free and, everything's awesome, smooth sailing, right? I really don't believe there's an end. I think choosing this path, it literally is choosing a journey. It was never about there's no destination. The destination is really where all of us are going at the very end. The destination is death. But if you choose to consciously heal, then what you're doing is you're choosing a path of consciously doing this kind of work to wake up parts of yourself that were unconscious before or didn't see, you know, the truth of life or the truth of a situation, the truth of a relationship. You're walking this path. It's a path. It's not a destination. Um, and so say your question one more time. I want to make sure I address it.
Yeah, just like what's the hardest path or the hardest part about staying on that path
Mhm.
and making the change, I guess, a little bit more permanent when that magic moment and that euphoria of this awakening fades?
Okay, thank you for that again. I think that's why I started to go into this. It's like the honeymoon always ends, right? And you always get back to a place where you are sort of just like living life and kind of in the mundanity of life. And I really do believe that when you're talking about any kind of work with the subconscious, whether it's breath work, medicine works, hypnosis, any of this work, the integration of that work is just as important as that crazy, incredible, peak mystical experience you may have in a breathwork journey or a psychedelic medicine journey, or really any kind of healing, whether it's, getting a mediumship reading where your mind is blown because, your great aunt comes through. Like the integration of what is received is the most important point. It actually is the boring part that is the most important. It's the how do I take all this information and use it to make choices differently? And the making of choices differently, that's really where the growth is. That's where the evolution is. It's not necessarily in the actual experience of that healing thing or that healing exercise or ceremony or whatever that may be. Those unlock something that you need to feel or see or receive, and then that information, that experience that you got, that can now inform how you choose to show up differently. So to me, I feel like you need somebody to I feel like accountability is really important. I usually like to kind of tailor my programs in that way where the journey that whether it's breath work or psychedelic is one thing, psychedelic medicine, that's one part of it. But there's a lot of prep and there's a lot of integration afterwards. And that is the meat of it, the integration. Um, if you're just doing the journey, if you're just showing up and getting breath work, like I think they're powerful, but I almost kind of feel like there could be more squeezed out of it, like more impact squeezed out of it if you were to really focus on the integration. You use the example of getting a massage, right? Where you like kind of, like massage out all that tension. Well, if you continue to use a foam roller to keep your body, like that's really where your body can stay more flexible. But some people don't want to do that, right? They don't want to do the work afterwards, or they get tired and they just go back to the masseuse, which is fine. That's another way of approaching it. But for me, I feel like I don't want to take anything for granted, whether again, it's a breathwork journey, a medicine journey, any of these healing modalities. I don't want to take it for granted. I want to get that information or have that experience. And I really want to create change from that, you know? Because I think it's really easy to get onto that track where you're just like, okay, another medicine journey. Okay, another one, another one, another one. And you're chasing that high in a sense that you're chasing that like peak experience that blows you wide open. And after a while, all you are doing is running away. You're getting into this place of escaping your actual life, chasing after these peak experiences. I've seen people so almost discombobulated and ungrounded because they're doing way too much medicine work. I don't think you can't do too much breath work because you're just breathing oxygen in. But I do feel like when it comes to like things like psychedelic medicine, there is such a thing as way too much. But even in the breathwork example, I would say, you know, even the practice can become a drug. Even the practice can become escape. And so I find myself in this moment on the path really checking myself like, okay, are you wanting to do this? Are you trying to get another reading? Are you trying to do another medicine journey? Like, why are you doing this? Are you wanting to escape? Are you so frustrated that you're just sitting here and it feels like nothing is moving, that you need to do something to just like shake things up, when really the invitation right now is just to sit and just to be in this liminality of like not knowing what's next. That is actually the practice, So, um, yeah, I I hope I answered that. But yeah, I'm very wary of like some of this healing work becoming another kind of escape hatch because it absolutely can be.
It sounds like it'd be very easy to run away from stuff. It's like you're running toward, but in a sense, you're running away
Yeah.
and you're not honoring the messages that come through, which are probably meant for you to do the work to make them in cement. And then that allows you to maybe ascend a bit more.
Yeah.
As somebody's listening to this, they might feel anxious, burnt out, overwhelmed, grieving, any
Mhm.
sort of emotion. Um, but they don't really, and they feel the pull for deeper change, but don't really know where to start. They've heard breath work, they've heard, different things that you offer.
Mhm.
What would you say to somebody who comes to you and just says, I feel disconnected, I feel unhappy, I feel burnt out? Ellen, where do I start?
Mm. I would really start with, for me, the kind of somatic therapy work I do. It's called somagetics, but again, it's really listening to the energetics of your trauma in your body. Because somebody who's feeling all these things and not wanting to feel all those things, to me, they need to develop or widen out, in a sense, their window of tolerance of being able to realize that whether you're feeling grief, whether you're feeling discomfort, all these different things, learning how to actually be with those feelings is what is going to allow you to express that energy and ultimately move beyond that energy that may be kind of taking up space. So I'm sure we've all heard the phrase like what you resist persists. So for me, the way I would approach somebody like that is simply having a somatic therapy session with them first, where we're just talking, and I am just through voice guidance, guiding them to sit and feel into their body and feel into that discomfort, whatever that pain or discomfort may be. And by just being with it, just gently being with it as much as they can tolerate at the time, being with it, breathing into it, identifying where it sits within their body, we start to go deeper into it and we start to connect that to old stories or even old memories of things that may have happened when they were children. And that we start to kind of like root down, like find the origin of why they're feeling what they're feeling. And usually, what I like to do after that is guide them into a breathwork journey to start to move that energy. But I think even identifying and learning how to feel, like learning how to be with that really uncomfortable feeling, is step number one. And recognizing that, even these uncomfortable feelings are part of life. Doesn't mean that you're going to be feeling that acute grief forever. But also, I think the grief tends to stay when we don't honor it, when we don't allow ourselves to feel it. At least that was the case for myself. I didn't feel my grief or allow myself to really be with it for a good almost 3 decades. And it all finally caught up to me. And I feel like the burnout I experienced in my career had a lot to do with my unresolved grief. And so leaving that career and starting on this healing journey really was about me doing my own grief work. And that's really when breathwork found me. And that's when the sacred mushroom found me as my teachers and as, the 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 vehicles for that healing to happen.
What's one myth about transformation that you wish people would just let go of?
That there's a finish line, that there's an end to it. There's no silver bullet. There's no end to this. You got to decide if this is what you want to commit to and allow. Um, and I want to say at this moment, it's okay if you don't want to transform too. I think there's some people who are just like, um, it, it's like they get into this like I gotta do all the things to heal, 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 and then before you know it, they find themselves like on the same track that they were on, but just now healing has become that prison. So I would say, yeah, there it it's a decision. It's a decision whether or not you want to transform. It's a decision whether, I mean, and like we are evolving, whether you want to or not. We are changing every single day. That's just like a part of life. But I would say conscious transformation. It sounds like you're asking about conscious transformation. Yeah, there's no end to it. If you want to be on this ride, you got to sign up for this ride and know that this ride is going to take you to the very, very end.
You mean we don't arrive and just get to chill out? What the heck?
I mean, there's moments where you slow down, right? Just like, and I think this is why I feel so committed to this work too. It's this whole idea of like expansion and contraction. We're constantly chasing the expansion because it feels good. Like, oh, I'm on a high. Like I feel good. I'm on top of the world. Things are opening up. It's clear. I can see where I'm going. And everything that goes up has to come back down. Everything that's born has to die too. So it's, we have to get to a point where we honor that contraction too. And yet I still fight against it so hard. Like, what is wrong with me? My first thought, what is wrong with me that I'm feeling like this? What can I do to stop feeling like this? Well, maybe I'm needing to learn how to be with it and feel it and just allow it to be here. And if you stop fighting so much, that energy can move through you. It has more of a chance to move through you more quickly. Kind of like being in an undertow of the ocean. I always love this example. Like if you struggle trying to get yourself above water again, it just takes you further down. So if you stop kicking and screaming and just like hold yourself, the ocean will spit you back out. but we love to kick and try our damnedest to get out of those situations.
Yeah, we do. Um, as our time together, which I've loved, comes to a close in this moment, I feel like every question that I had prepared to ask you kind of near the tail end, you've sort of beautifully included in it your own organic way. It's maybe a little unorthodox,
Mhm.
but are there any messages that you would like to share? Anything that's coming up for you that you feel you would like listeners to take with them? Or maybe something we didn't cover that is just something while we're at it, you'd like to use to put a little beautiful heart at the end of this conversation?
You know, it's funny, the first thing that comes up, only because I literally just got out or back from a 2-week-long visit with my family, and being with family, I'm sure whoever's listening, you could probably relate. It's always the hardest initiation in a sense, or the hardest, process of healing, actually, I think that you go through because they know how to push your buttons the best, right? And I think you really chose your family truly before you got here, you know, before you incarnated. And so, yeah, they have the remote control that knows what's going to trigger you and all the things. Um, but this is so not related to. I guess it's kind of related to the ancestral healing aspect of what we talked about. But I think what I really learned in this last trip is I'm not responsible for my mom's emotional well-being. I am not responsible for, you know, keeping the peace in the family. And so I'm really speaking to those out there who have, you know, even a good relationship with your family. We all take on these roles in our family dynamics. Um, and we just closed out of Libra season. We're now just, you know, we're recording this at the very start of Scorpio season. So the season of death and transformation, right? But Libra was all about relational dynamics. And so I feel like what I really want to share is really look at where you sit within your family structure, your family constellation. What roles do you play? Because we all have them, right? We all play these roles. And I just want to gently invite you to look at if you are holding anything that is absolutely not yours to hold, because that's something that I'm still healing and growing more and more aware of, even having been on this journey for a little while now. And, you know, I have to say, even as challenging as this visit was, I'm so, so grateful for it because it really showed me where I've been leaking energy trying to hold things for people I really deeply love, but I really it's not mine to hold, you know? And as a facilitator, I'm learning that lesson in a big way too. So whatever's not yours, drop it now. That's all I gotta say.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. I would imagine people are going to love this conversation. They're going to fall in love with you. A lot of what you share, I think, speaks to something really deep down inside of us. Um, Somebody wants to connect with you, is interested in exploring some of the healing, modalities and services that you offer. How do people get in touch with you?
You can find me on Instagram at Trip with Ellen, just one TRIP with Ellen, ELLEN. But the best way to, I think, get a hold of me is actually just direct email me because finding myself not wanting to be on Instagram more and more and more and turning more towards writing on Substack and longer form and, you know, not really caring these days about how wide a following I have, but just really trying to show up as authentically as I can, even if it means one or two people in my groups. I run a membership called the Alive membership that's on Mighty. I think that that's a really beautiful way to start to do some of this work with me in a way that's, you know, low investment, you know, I think, and more financially accessible. But you can email me at hi at tripwithellen.com. And you could set up a discovery call with me. I do a free 30-minute discovery call. So I can hear what's going on and also kind of steer you in the right way if you need some guidance on what would be the most supportive for you.
That's beautiful. Well, thank you so much for your time. So wonderful reconnecting with you. And hopefully we can do this again soon. I didn't even get through half of my questions. But thank you so much, Ellen. I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, same. Thank you so much for the invitation.
I'll talk to you soon.